Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I'm okay. How are you? How you doing, everybody? Me and the mute button having a little struggle there. Okay, we're back on the air. The sun is back online. Congress is back in town, more or less. It's Tuesday. They begin arriving at this point, and they get to work at some point later in the day, and then finally tomorrow they're in full swing for Wednesday and Thursday. Of course, Thursday they begin to dash for the exits, and the work week comes to a close. That's the way they do things in Congress, especially when there's nothing in particular for them to do. But as it turns out this time, I don't know. The crazies in the Republican conference have a long list of things that they insist they definitely do want to do. They just don't know how to do them and don't particularly care whether or not they get done. So, we'll all be sitting around twiddling our thumbs quite a bit. And, that'll be the cleanup for this week and next. We'll see how things go. It's a Tuesday that feels like a Monday because we were off yesterday because the sun was swallowed by a giant dragon. That's, there are people who believe that, or there were people who believe that. At any rate, it was very interesting. Did you get a chance to see any of the eclipse? What? I can't hear you. All right, fine. It's a one-way medium. But my guess is that most of you that lived anywhere where there was any significant coverage of the sun probably did venture outside and try and take a look. If with any luck, you had clear weather. We had good, clear, sunny skies until the sun was swallowed by a giant or a dragon. And then, so we were able to have a good view of it. But who cares? Because I left town and went and viewed it somewhere else. That's why we were off the air yesterday. A lengthy drive, not too bad. Some people drove hours and hours and hours. And then some more hours in order to get where they were going. We decided actually to head in the other direction, figuring, okay, well, traffic won't be so bad, right? In other words, from where we are, if you had driven north and west for many, many hours, you could get into the path of totality. I need like an echo effect. But we made it to the path of totality for 2000, what was it? 17, I think, down to the Charleston, South Carolina area to get into the path of that totality. And somehow everybody says, this one is so much better because reasons. Although I think the moon was, I think we're supposed to be experiencing a super moon, except for the fact that it's not a full moon. I guess we're at new moon in the cycle. At any rate, I guess it's just that much closer to Earth, and so maybe blocked more of the sun. Is that what the excitement was about, or is it just the fact that this one happened to bring it, the path of totality passed closer to the northeast epicenter of our media universe? Maybe that had something to do with it. I saw television imagery from all over in the path of totality that made it look extremely, extremely dark. I don't remember it being that dark during the 2017 eclipse. It was dark, but like twilight dark. But I couldn't tell whether this was really dark or just camera dark because there weren't any, ordinarily if you have even just your regular stand-up reporter somewhere, they turn on the lights and flood the picture with light to make it look normal on television screens. But anyway, if you were in the path of totality, you can tell me all about it. I don't know, I guess, somehow, through one or another of our channels, whether through the social media channel or, of course, email, that old standby. You can find me. Do I remind people often enough? Probably not. Kagrox, K-A-G-R-O-X, at gmail.com will get you through. Complaints go to Greg, and I don't even have an email for that, so there you go. We don't want to hear it, basically. We're small enough that we don't care. How about that? All right, well, we do care, and we get complaints all the time. And actually, they mostly come in on not Facebook, but YouTube comments, generally where we accrue most of our complaints. Anyway, it was fun. We went to take a special sort of look at things. Justice says they only got they had 30% coverage there. And did you go out and bother to take a look? I wondered about that. I mean, look, having 30% of the sun covered for a little while is pretty interesting, especially if you already have some of those safety glasses, and that's fun. The people in the path of totality looked like they had a great time. Many people heading north and west in order to see it. And I don't know. And I guess it also, did the path of totality cross into Montreal? I think so. And I guess they all walked around being very indifferent about it. They received it just as enthusiastically as anybody else. But in French, which is difficult to tell when people are being enthusiastic, I think. Not really. It's a fun joke to make at the expense of our French-Canadian friends. Hello, bonjour, etc. You're probably not listening to the show because it's not being translated into French. So anyway, we had fun. We went, like I said, south and east, so opposite direction, but it was still like, I don't know, 85% coverage where we were. We went to Wallops Island, Virginia. What an island. What a wallop. It's very close to Chincoteague, Virginia. Perhaps maybe you're familiar with that. But a coastal, marshy, I don't know, I guess it is an island, barrier island, wildlife refuge, and rocket range. Woo! Let's have both. NASA maintains a facility there. I think I might have squeaked out a mention of what we were doing on Friday. But it worked out. They maintain a facility there. They launch, smaller rockets, smaller than, say, the space shuttle and stuff like that, which, of course, they still use the big facility down in Florida for that. But this for smaller rockets, and of late, in the last couple of years, a couple of International Space Station resupply missions, probably some other stuff that they're going to get really mad that I don't mention because, these guys dedicate their lives to this thing and nobody notices. So anyway, it's very interesting. And these were smaller sounding rockets, they call them. Why? Reasons. And they were just sending up scientific instruments into the ionosphere, if I remember correctly, to measure the effects of the eclipse on the ionosphere. Let's see what happens when the sun is blotted out. So they sent one up at the beginning of the eclipse, and then one at the height of the eclipse, at least in the area, and then one towards the end. And they measured things, and we watched them blast off, and that was kind of cool. And they're small and speedy, so it's not like watching a giant rocket lift off, which kind of slowly rises into the sky, burning a bazillion pounds of fuel. These things are they're small and sleek, and I guess they move a little bit more like surface-to-air missiles is what it looks like, which must be weird because there's a air base across the street that, although it's a NASA facility, so I think they know what's going on, but there was somebody practicing all sorts of maneuvers in a communications plane, looked like kind of a prop-driven, dual-tailed little plane with the big radar disc on it, like the AWACS have, except not as big and large as AWACS. And that was interesting, and they're flying around. The rockets are flying up there. These are 2-stage rockets. They're kind of cool, I don't know what happens to them. I think they might. I have a little card that explains. I think they deploy a parachute, and I don't know, fall in the Chesapeake Bay. I don't know what happens to these things. So look out. Rockets are falling all over the place in the area. And, I don't know, super exciting, I guess. Maybe out into the ocean or something. I think they sort of fire them up into the air at an angle kind of eastward and over Chincoteague. And from thence into the ocean. And it was very exciting. And the first rocket that went off, which, by the way, I was expecting a big countdown, and we didn't get that until the second and third rockets. I don't know, maybe they didn't hit the mute button right, and they counted down, nothing happened, nobody heard anything, all of a sudden, whoosh, rocket went off. Super exciting also. The eclipse had started, and then, the writer's room went crazy because a bald eagle flew out of the woods. This is a wildlife refuge, and just soared over the viewing area of this Wallops Island facility, and everybody, we all, like idiots, we clapped for a bird. Yay, bird! Good job flying. The bird was clearly I don't really know what I did to impress these people, but I'm going elsewhere. And we didn't see another one for the rest of the day, but kids ran around all day and saying, look, an eagle, every time they saw a seagull, so that was kind of fun. All right, that was interesting. And then we had some interesting traffic situation trying to get into the place. But you don't need to know that. You need to know what's going on in Congress. That's what you're here for. And today's Tuesday, even though it feels like Monday for me. Joan McCarter expected to be here in the later portions of the show. It occurs to me that I haven't, checked to see whether there's any note about today. It's a little more hit or miss. What with her full-time job writing for the front page of Daily Kos and all. But at any rate, they are back online in Congress. This is the week tomorrow, April 10th, April 9th today, my brother's birthday. Not Mark, but another one who's, I don't know. I don't give everybody's name necessarily on the air. They don't really love it. But another of I have brothers all over the place. I got half brothers. I got step brothers. I got brothers. So I just go with brothers on all of them. It's a lot easier, and it's not nicer, too. Happy birthday, anonymous brother. But he's not listening to the show either because he's working elsewhere. So, at any rate, tomorrow they'll mark his birthday one day late by sending the impeachment papers for Mayorkas over to the Senate. And they've been sitting on them and sitting on their hands and doing nothing for several weeks. And then, of course, over the Easter recess, which was a 2-week recess. And now comes the time when the Senate gets to decide what they're going to do with it. All expectations are that Schumer will leverage the Democratic majority in the Senate and some disaffected Republicans who know and have openly admitted that the Mayorkas impeachment is a stupid Republican stunt and will likely attempt to move either to just dismiss the charges directly in one vote or to just table them, not even bother referring them to a committee. I don't know if that's really going to work. I mean, if they get the votes, they get the votes. But it might be in discussions with Republicans over the next day or so that they find out that, Republicans want it referred to a committee so that there can be at least the possibility of a trial. I mean, there's nothing to try, and even the Republicans who want a trial know that there isn't anything. They just don't want to upset their House colleagues, not because they like their House colleagues, but because their House colleagues are annoying a-holes, and God only knows what garbage they're going to send them or what problems they're going to cause if they don't placate these idiots. So, that might happen. Let's see. There's other things happening. Of course, we return to Marjorie Taylor Greene's maybe lonely crusade to force another motion to vacate the chair and another speakership election afterwards. No indication that she actually has the critical levels of support that she would need there. No indication really that Democrats are interested in going through the exercise again. So unlikely to work, but it's happening, and so everybody is keeping an eye on it. The Hill has kind of a roundup on the various terrible things they're going to have to deal with this week under the headline from Michael Schnell of Johnson faces moment of truth on Ukraine. It is, of course, the Ukraine issue that appears to be central to Marjorie Taylor Greene's latest stupid effort to vacate the chair. She's super mad about the idea of funding Ukraine and sending weapons and other support to Ukraine so that they can maybe not be conquered by Russia, which sort of used to be a central thesis to Republican governance, but isn't anymore because they all have YouTube channels now, and I guess nothing matters. So, okay, that's the way they're putting it, and she insists, by way of turning it into something domestic that makes sense, in other words, so that it's not just nakedly service to Putin, and I use all those terms advisedly. I don't know if the two have met, but it could get weird if they did. But just so that it doesn't look like naked service to Putin, they've appended this other demand. Well, we shouldn't be funding Ukraine when we haven't eliminated the possibility of anybody anywhere who's brown and I don't like coming into this country. Therefore, that's a border in crisis, right? A person got across it and I didn't want them to, so border crisis. Anyway, so they insist, well, we can't do anything until we build a wall, seal off the country hermetically. There'll be another excuse after that or whatever, but this is the way they connect it to, I'm doing my job as a representative of people here in the United States of America, as opposed to the real job, which is I'm apparently working for Putin. So anyway, we've got that going on. They may or may not have a fight about actually vacating the chair. They will have a fight about Ukraine. The speaker ostensibly decides, even though he'll be doing so in consultation with others, and the power belongs to others, and yet is exercised on occasion in the name certainly of the majority leadership on what will come to the floor. So Ukraine aid, that now complicated by the fact that they also wanted to package it together, of course, with aid to others. Everyone knows who those others are. One of them, you know from listening to the show 100 times over, Taiwan. Don't forget Taiwan. But the other one you know because you also are aware of the news, Israel. And now you're getting into a situation where, well, if you don't think the Ukraine issue is complex enough, throw in the Israel issue, where you'll have the Democrats on whom you're likely relying to supply the necessary votes to get the package over the finish line, given Freedom Caucus temper tantrums. But then that caucus is going to be split on whether or not they want to continue with aid of any kind to Israel as things worsen there, or I guess as I don't know how to put it exactly. Things come into sharper focus, certainly in terms of the end of the patience of even countries, actors, individual analysts, etc., who have been giving Israel the benefit of the doubt for longer than others, now running out of patience with having done that. So it becomes that much more difficult. It's a very complex situation. I haven't heard of any further complications developing about the Taiwan aid, but maybe. Who knows? They had an earthquake lately. Did they need to up the number or something, maybe, because of earthquake assistance? I don't know. That I haven't heard. Doing a great job flying under the radar there in Taiwan. So, that's all hanging out there. What to do with the impeachment papers will become an issue shortly, and it just adds to the excitement. Every day, a challenge with these guys. Also, oh yes, right, something else mentioned in the Hill article, the House eyes a vote on the FISA bill. Everyone loves FISA, right? The House this week is planning to consider legislation to reform the U.S.'s warrantless surveillance powers. Remember, Republicans used to be huge fans of warrantless surveillance powers for the government. And of course, now they are big government doubters because so many of them are sitting in prison awaiting trial for January 6th related charges. We just had a local couple here in our area of Loudoun County who just got themselves finally arrested for their part in January 6th. I don't think that they're charged with any violent crimes, but they did enter the Capitol, which will get you in trouble. And of course, they had they were more or less anonymous and for the longest time had their faces covered. But eventually the face covers came off, plus their cell phones gave them away. And anyway, they were only in the building for, I think, 12 minutes. So they're not, it's not the major crimes unit. There's no television show dedicated to the investigation that uncovered their identities. But it's just sort of interesting. And he's like the local wackadoodle and his local wackadoodle wife, both of whom are, in fact, wackadoodles in their own right. They're not, it's not one riding on the coattails of the other by any means. But the husband in this mix. Maybe I'll see if I can find that article. Just, I don't know if any of you are going to want to pour over it unless you are local, and we do have a few local listeners. But folks from Lowe's Island, which is very close to the Trump golf course. It's the community that was built around that golf course before it was a Trump golf course. And anyway, so the husband in this particular duo is a local Republican Party crank and as they say, frequent flyer at the county government meetings, the county board of supervisors, with various complaints about election integrity. And he's just been a pain in the ass for everybody about election integrity, insisting that, massive fraud thing, the whole pile of garbage. And he's well known for that. His wife is she's a doctor. Yes, she's was a practicing physician. Now is just thinking about practicing, I guess. Apparently, she had a totally normal-ish, legit medical practice here in the area, practicing at the local hospital, and then got fired by her medical group when, over a dispute about COVID vaccine. I'm not doing it. You can't give me the COVID vaccine. It's gonna, whatever. So ended up getting fired and now practices something else, some sort of form of essentially, well, as they sort of put it, Christian medicine, where they pray for you a lot. And then, whatever happens, happens. So they're fun people. And they have built a small, cottage industry for themselves in the neighborhood, doubting election outcomes and trying to get the local board of elections to agree that there was terrible, massive amounts of cheating. And to their credit, it's a majority Republican elections board somehow around here, which is kind of interesting all by itself, given how I keep telling you it's not a Republican area anymore. But that's the way. I don't know how they constitute the elections board, but they're not interested in this guy and his stupid theories. So that's to their credit, I think. But he keeps pushing it and trying to make them watch weirdo crank documentaries about how there's totally proof. It's just that none of it is in these movies. Anyway, imagine all of that. And I brought that up mostly on the guise of speaking to you about the fact that they have to revise the FISA bill. And it used to be that they loved warrantless surveillance and expansive surveillance powers because they were going to be used ostensibly. Well, the bill of sale said they were going to be used to stop terrorists, meaning, brown international terrorists, from doing things, except it really also meant that their political enemies would be surveilled, even though they were trying, at the time, they tried to say that they didn't want that, or that wasn't the aim of it, and no, of course, we understand that it's un-American to surveil your political enemies, and yet the surveillance was being used to surveil peace groups and people who were opposed to the various wars that Republicans in particular were more unified in their support of, let's say it that way, and that they wanted to be doing. And then, of course, let's use it against Black Lives Matter organizers as well, and, the political left. Then, when there was finally an event for which even our exceptionally conservative law enforcement community was willing to use, not necessarily warrantless surveillance powers, but expansive surveillance powers and data processing powers and subpoenas to private collectors and processors of that data to arrest them. Now they're very up in arms, and they don't like this whole idea of this surveillance state that we live in because it catches you having been in the Capitol building on January 6, 2021, 4 years later, and ruins your life. Yay. So now I guess they're upset about it. So the House is this week planning to consider legislation to reform the U.S.'s warrantless surveillance powers. Not quite on point here, but bringing the contentious matter to the floor as lawmakers stared down an April 19th deadline to extend the authorities. That really ought to have been the headline there. We face no government shutdown deadline this week for the first time in 100 years, but instead we face, allegedly a warrantless surveillance power shutdown of April 19th. That's not to say that they would necessarily honor the shutdown deadline when the time comes. But, maybe they would under a, Democratic administration, possibly. Anyway, Johnson, that is to say the Speaker of the House, unveiled a compromise bill to extend Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that's FISA, on Friday to no one, because they weren't here, officially kicking off, even though no one was there, the latest effort to reform the spying powers. FISA's Section 702 allows the government to spy on non-citizens located outside the U.S., so really not that much to do with the people that they're arresting with connections to January 6th, but somehow they think, they think, for instance, you can't make me wear a mask because HIPAA, and they don't even know how to spell HIPAA. Well, or you can't tell me I can't do this because First Amendment, or Second Amendment for that matter, or whatever amendment they come up with, whatever they might imagine protects them. It doesn't really matter. Similarly, I don't know, they heard something about the Trump campaign complaining about FISA at some point. It had more to do with Carter Page than anybody else. And so they figure they can use that to complain about the government too. Anyway, it really doesn't have much to do with what they did. The legislation titled the Reforming Intelligence and Surveillance Act, that's, I guess, RISA. How do you like that? Is similar to the proposal that the House almost voted on in February. Why didn't they do it? I don't know. Which would limit how agencies such as the FBI can review information on Americans that is swept up while looking into individuals abroad. It does not, however, include a warrant requirement that several lawmakers, particularly those in the House Judiciary Committee, have been pushing for. We'll be right back. I'm going to cut myself off early. That's the lesson of talking to... Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Gil Aquino. You see, that's what I meant about not speaking on my way into the break. Okay, does everyone get what I did there? Usually I didn't use my usual comeback line there. And of course that is going to shock the hell out of Gil when he finally hears it. But the point is that he mentioned to me that, well, if we trail off our speech, we use every second available to us technically. We can go 2 seconds past the hour or past the minute. And but that 2 seconds in the live broadcast, the way things work out between us and Netroots Radio, apparently that's kind of inaudible, and I fade out. So I kind of said, and that's what I learned from speaking to. Yeah, and then just jump back in and say it was Gil. Okay, but it's a good lesson, and we probably ought to have been doing it that way the whole time, and perhaps we'll learn to do it now. But there's so much to say. And yet I waste time on things like, well, so we clapped for this bald eagle. Anyway, I know there were some other things I wanted to tell you about, and I did want to tell you, I guess, a little bit more. We might as well finish this Hill roundup just to get us ready for when we speak to Joan. So I mentioned to you they're going to also, in addition to everything else that's so contentious that we've been talking about, have to think about revising FISA with a new bill that they happen to have named RISA. I don't know whether they speak about it that way or not, but I guess the bill apparently doesn't include this warrant requirement that several lawmakers, particularly those on the House Judiciary Committee, have been pushing for. Members of the House Intelligence Committee have raised concerns that such a warrant requirement would cause delays to the process that would hamper efforts by intelligence agents to respond to threats in real time. So just want to make this interesting political science observation that as between control of the House by Democrats or Republicans, or even indeed crazy-ass MAGA Republicans, one thing that hasn't changed is, one dynamic that hasn't changed is tension between the outlooks on warrantless surveillance between the Judiciary Committee members and Intelligence Committee members, even when it's crazy, lunatic Republicans. And not only that, the dynamic remains exactly the same. Not only is there tension, but it's the same tension, which is to say that the Judiciary members are more concerned with the traditional, balance between the need for intelligence in order to have effective law enforcement and preventative law enforcement, where you're talking about disaster level events like terrorist attacks, and civil liberties for real. Like I think they have a poor understanding of most civil liberties, or they only care about the ones that affect them, and they don't care about the ones that other people depend on. But they do see this tension, and they fight about it, and they fight to preserve somebody's version of civil liberties versus intrusive surveillance powers, which are favored by members of the Intelligence Committee because it's a more focused discipline in the sense that, well, yes, we understand that there's supposed to be constitutional limitations on things, but we're the Intelligence Committee and we're super concerned about being able to get more intelligence. The amount that we hear, things that we hear from the intelligence community, they can only tell us part of it anyway. And part of it they can't tell us because they just don't know, but they would be able to know if they were able to do more intrusive surveillance of more people, and why won't we let them do that? And they essentially hear more from the intelligence community begging for more power than the Judiciary Committee does. And the Judiciary Committee is charged more directly with, does this make sense? The Intelligence Committee members here, we need this power in order, we could have prevented XYZ terrible thing, let's say, or we'll use it to prevent XYZ terrible thing if we get that power. And that's what the Intelligence Community or Intelligence Committee members hear, and they say, we want to act and give you that. And the Judiciary Committee is charged with, is this a good idea? Yes, you could use it to prevent, you say, some sort of catastrophic event, but at what cost? To the Constitution. And that's actually their charge. And it is amazing that even in the MAGA era, when they can exhibit no other understanding as we would ordinarily recognize it of the Constitution we know, this instinct survives. That's kind of interesting. And it may be just triggered by nothing more than instinctive level. Well, we're the ones getting arrested now. So we're concerned with, because when Democrats controlled the House and therefore both committees, there was a similar division, except that the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee at the time, though there were Democrats on the Judiciary Committee safeguarding constitutional precepts, Republicans on the Judiciary Committee in many cases said, to hell with all of that. We can use this to arrest brown people. We hate the Constitution. And then, of course, when the duties fell to them and the shoe was on the other foot, they discovered, we have these principles. But now, of course, if you dig even deeper than that, you find, well, these principles will protect us, the white people, from getting arrested for things that we did to try and stop the brown people. So now, It's not necessarily that this is an enduring tension of the same nature no matter which party is in charge, but rather that you find excuses. Republicans eventually find excuses to take on that role, even if they ordinarily, you would think, would not. Anyway, so carrying on with that section of this report from the Hill, in a Dear Colleague letter on Friday, that is, does everyone know what that is? A Dear Colleague letter, the way it's a term of art on Capitol Hill, when one member of Congress or one house or another writes to all their colleagues because they have a bill coming up. Either they've introduced something and they're looking for co-sponsors, or it's coming up for a vote and I want to, essentially nudge you and lobby you for your vote. In a Dear Colleague letter on Friday, Johnson urged members of his conference to rally around the bill, warning that inaction ahead of the April 19th deadline could prompt the Senate to move forward with a clean FISA extension, so they wouldn't get their chance to monkey with it. It is critically important that we succeed in passing these reforms next week because the April 19th expiration of FISA's Section 702 authority is quickly approaching. If our bill fails, we will be faced with an impossible choice and can expect the Senate to jam us with a clean extension. That's usually not jamming per se. That's straight ahead legislation. That includes no reforms at all. That is clearly an unacceptable option. Not to the Senate, it isn't. And then lastly, they mention, that giant bridge in Baltimore that collapsed and the president promised to pursue federal funding for its rebuilding, which therefore means that Republicans have to publicly oppose federal funding for rebuilding this piece of critically important national infrastructure. Is the bridge itself critically important national infrastructure? Well, yes, it's part of the federal highway system. It's the outer Baltimore Beltway, a major commuter route, etc. But also, of course, that bridge, while it's important in carrying traffic across the water, is sitting in the way of the port of Baltimore. It's crashed into the water across the channel that ships use to get in and out. It's a major port, and, despite the fact that everybody, a normal person can understand why everybody in America has a vested interest in making sure that this port is working properly, MAGA America never does. Our cars and imported goods appear out of thin air, thanks to the magic of Donald Trump himself, and we don't need anything besides which, screw the rest of the world, and blah, blah, blah. And if you're an American and you're selling your goods to foreigners, screw you too, even though that doesn't make any sense, even in the MAGA conception of things. But, lashing out in anger in every direction. That's essentially what it's about. So, attention this week. The Hill reports will also be focused on federal funding for the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, which fell last month, sort of almost, is that passive voice? I mean, it didn't. It's not. It fell. But it was, of course, smashed to bits by a boat, but whatever. Fell last month after being struck by a cargo ship. There you go. President Biden has called on Congress to appropriate the funds for the rebuilding effort, a stance that Office of Management and Budget Director Shalanda Young re-upped on Friday. While we continue to assess the costs alongside our federal and state partners, we are asking the Congress to join us in demonstrating our commitment to aid and recovery efforts by authorizing a 100% federal cost share, that's not a share at all, for rebuilding the bridge, Young wrote in a letter to top lawmakers. This authorization would be consistent with past catastrophic bridge collapses. The administration has not yet made a formal request to Congress, and maybe that's on them, for that funding, but it remains unclear how much money the reconstruction effort will cost. Some estimates put the figure at roughly $2 billion. So if they could just collect the fines from Donald Trump, they'd be able to cover that. Not really. Biden's plan for Congress to approve the funds, however, could run into trouble on Capitol Hill as some Republicans express opposition to using federal dollars for the rebuilding effort amid concerns over the ballooning deficit. Oh, yeah, sure. The House Freedom Caucus released an official position on Friday that demanded a series of conditions for considering funding to reconstruct the bridge, including that the funding is fully offset as they put that in quotes since they don't really know what that means, and that the Biden administration first lifts its pause on approvals for natural gas export projects. Why? Because it's a hostage and it was available. Schumer, for his part, called the bipartisan cooperation in the upper chamber called for bipartisan cooperation. I didn't know. I guess he didn't get it yet. To greenlight federal funding. What do you know? He says it'll take bipartisan cooperation for the Senate to act quickly and help reopen the part of Baltimore, a major artery for commerce, and rebuild the key bridge as quickly as possible. He wrote in a letter, that will be a letter to colleagues on Friday. And guess, how do you start a letter to colleagues? Dear colleague. You get it? All right. Well, that wrapped up that nicely. That was an extra fun little tip that Michael made possible for us. All right, time for other serious considerations. It's not that this last segment was totally unserious. It's just that there's more to get to. All right, let's see. The Daily Beast picked up over the weekend on that which I had already told you last week. But it'll be interesting to see the rest of the country catching up on our analysis of Trump's appeals bond in New York. And there's further developments in that, and it's always worth, I don't know. Well, I say it's always worth seeing. Maybe it really isn't worth seeing at all. The Daily Beast's analysis of this and see if they picked up on anything new or something we might have missed out on. Jose Pagliari, who is usually writing on some of the beats we enjoy most over at the Daily Beast, writes under the headline, Trump's $175 million bond is even shadier than it looks. And more problems developing with that, by the way, over the weekend, up to and including word that, what's his name? Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh guy. If you're a South Park person, you've already figured that out. Or if you took my advice and looked it up, Googled it the other day, now you know. You never would have believed it if you hadn't heard it here first or already known. Anyway, apparently, not only did he step in with this $175 million bond that he may or may not have the money for, but he offered to step in with that $454 million bond earlier. And he didn't have the money for that one either. But so I guess in that sense, it wouldn't have mattered. But the point here is that at some point, Trump and his lawyers told the courts in New York, listen, the $450 million plus bond is impossible to get. Remember the story. I've talked to 30, brokers and approached everybody that I can to put up the bond, and they just won't do it. Nobody will do it. You need to reduce my bond. And they won that argument and got it reduced to $175 million. But apparently, in the middle of those pleadings with the court, Hanky and Knight Insurance apparently approached Trump and said, we will arrange the $450 million bond that you need. And the allegation is that Trump's attorneys, and this is bad news again for Trump attorneys, will and very well could get them disciplined, if not necessarily disbarred. But it's pretty close, I would say, to getting you disbarred when you do things like this. They neglected, they will say, at best, neglected to tell the court, while they were, of course, insisting, no, it's impossible. We've talked to everybody. There's literally no way to get the $450 million bond, except for the one that's pending right now where a guy said he would do it. But other than that, nope, impossible. They just told them it was impossible. And they did not notify the court that someone had approached them. They could have notified the court and said, but we think it's impracticable and they don't really have the money or whatever. They could have made a million excuses for them that would have been valid and would have kept them from putting themselves on the hook this way, but they didn't. That's just, for a while, I thought it was possible that Trump might have found semi-competent counsel in this New York case. I think he was the guy, I forget the name of the attorney he's using, except isn't it Todd something? Anyway, but this guy was like a former assistant U.S. attorney, I think, or something like that. He had some credentials, some government lawyer credentials, which is not always the greatest credentials in the world necessarily, but they're still relatively competent, usually, even though they are often political appointees. Still, they tend to be somewhat competent and learn something on the job. So I thought maybe he doesn't have the worst attorney in the world. It's not another Alina Habba. But as it turns out, I guess maybe that's questionable because this guy, I guess, gave his okay to saying, don't tell the judges about this one. We'll take a look at that article too. But first, I wanted to run through Jose Pagliari's report in the Daily Beast about why Trump's $175 million bond is even shadier than it looks, and see if there's really cause for more shade or it's just them catching up with us. But it's a good reminder and good setup for the other article, I guess. The little-known insurance company that rescued Donald Trump by providing a last-minute $175 million bank fraud bond isn't just unlicensed in New York, as we told you. It hasn't even been vetted by a voluntary state entity that would verify it meets minimum eligibility standards to provide financial stability. So in other words, if they had done or are still willing to pursue licensure in New York, a preliminary review, I guess you could say, of their finances would indicate that they would not get that licensure even on an emergency basis. Perhaps even more troubling, the legal document from Knight Specialty Insurance Company doesn't actually promise it will pay the money if the former president loses his $464 million bank fraud case on appeal. And I think that did get some mention toward the end of last week, that we said that they wrote the bond paperwork incorrect. And I went on and on about Trump and paperwork. And no, this wasn't necessarily Trump or his attorneys. This was the Knight attorneys. And I also thought, well, they operate as an insurance company. They probably do have a lawyer that has some, experience in writing these bonds, but I guess not. And the language of the bond, as we mentioned, I think by the end of the week, last week, was, oh yeah, we guarantee that if the appeal loses or there's some default judgment, that Donald J. Trump, defendant, will pay the $454 million bond. And it's like, well, then you're not issuing a bond, are you? The idea is that you, Knight Insurance, are putting yourself on the hook for $175 million if Trump doesn't show or loses the appeal. And then it's your business to try and recover from Donald Trump, not ours, the state of New York. So, just a total 100% misunderstanding of what a bond even is. Never mind being licensed in New York to issue bonds. You're not going to get licensed in New York to issue bonds if you don't know what bonds are or how they work. That's not likely to help your case. So that was pretty astonishing, really. Instead it says, this paperwork does, that Trump will pay, negating the whole point of an insurance company guarantee, according to 3 legal and bond experts who reviewed the contract for the Daily Beast. And that's great and all, and that's exactly how you should approach the reporting. But natural language reading of the material told you that on its face, it doesn't do what bonds were supposed to do. I say that having gone to law school, so maybe that's easier. But I think it's just such dry, stupid stuff that people's eyes, normal people, untrained in the law, who really should have been able to figure that out, their eyes glaze over because it's a legal document. But if they were forced to stay awake, drink coffee, read the document, they would have said, this doesn't make any sense. And it does not. Now, there's more. This is not common. It's a quote here. This is not common. The only reason this would be done is to limit the liability to the surety. Okay, there your eyes are glazing over again. The only reason this would be done would be to limit liability to Knight Insurance Company. But the whole point of a bond is that Knight is saying, we'll make sure the state gets paid no matter what. That's what the bond is about. And why do you even need that? Well, you don't if the defendant can and will put that money aside for the state. But if they won't or don't want to or can't, then a bond is the next best thing. But a bond that absolves the company putting up the bond of responsibility isn't a bond. So, yeah, that is not common. That, according to N. Alex Hanley, not Hanky, but Hanley, an expert in how companies appeal enormous judgments. I didn't know there was such an expert. But again, it doesn't require an expert to figure this out. These 2 points, noted here for the first time, well, now, hold on a second, validate the New York Attorney General's concerns that Trump is trying to avoid a financial punishment that could be catastrophic to his riches and reputation. Of course, it wasn't noted here for the first time. Well, it was noted. It was noted here on this show before it was noted in the Daily Beast. But of course, someone had probably noted it before we did, but all right. Well, all right. All glory to the Daily Beast. Okay, fine, sure. There are many questions here, and that short piece of paper gives very little comfort, said Maria T. Vullo, who was formerly New York's top financial regulator and presumably one of the other experts they consulted in all of this. I believe this paper isn't worth much, and there are more shenanigans behind it, said one former regulator who's intimately familiar with industry norms, but spoke only on condition of anonymity. I was not being anonymous about it. I also believe this paper isn't worth much. It's worth nothing. I mean, it doesn't even say we'll pay you money. So it's definitely worth nothing. And there are more shenanigans behind it. That's always true. Why? Because Trump and paperwork, man, said the leading expert of the world in doubting Trump's ability to execute paperwork correctly, David Waldman of Kagro in the Morning radio / podcast / live stream, which is what we actually do. Okay. After a 3-month trial ended with a state judge concluding that Trump committed bank fraud for a decade by lying about his wealth and property values, the real estate tycoon, if you want to call him that, he's a real estate raccoon, really, more than anything else, but okay, and his top executives were ordered to pay $464 million, a massive sum that increases every day with interest that dates back years, but unable to find a large and trusted surety company to provide a $500 million bond that would legally halt Attorney General Letitia James from seizing his properties, Trump convinced an appellate court to lower that sum to $175 million. He then opted for an insurance company in California that's tied to Don Henke Jr., a billionaire MAGA supporter who's built a nasty reputation by dealing in subprime auto loans that have resulted in numerous complaints about predatory business practices, like illegally repossessing the cars of American soldiers, for God's sake. How do you like that? And that's linked, so you know it's true-ish, or something like that. It links to a Daily Beast piece. Trump's bond backer repoed soldiers' cars, says Roger Solander in his piece dated, I don't know. I would tell you if the pop-up that blocks them didn't, that also on April 8th. That's an interesting backstory all by itself. I'm just going to mark that one. Maybe we can share it with you and you can read up on it on your own time. Although I may sneak over there. You never know. On Thursday, the Daily Beast noted how the Knight Specialty Insurance Company isn't licensed by New York's Department of Financial Services, a detail that has caught the attention of bond experts. What's more, the firm's financial statements show that it doesn't have the surplus needed to meet the capital requirements for posting the bond. Also, again, straightforward reading of the documents. They do make your eyes glaze over, but they are not long. It is very easy to read them, and I think easy to understand them. It's just numbers. Just like federal regulators require financial institutions to have sufficient reserves in case of a run on the banks, New York law limits how much money state-regulated surety companies can post to a single bond to 10% of a firm's total capital and surplus. However, a court filing by the company on Thursday showed that Knight Specialty only has $138 million in surplus, vastly exceeding the government-set cap because the Trump bond alone makes up 127% of the company's reserves. Thank you for doing the math there. That really helps. Based on the financial statement provided, Knight Specialty is providing a bond that is 1/3 of its total assets and greater than its surplus, which is incomprehensible for a carrier to underwrite, said Vullo, who was previously the superintendent of New York's DFS. So they definitely know, how this is supposed to work. But again, a reminder, you're not supposed to be able to issue a bond that unless the bond's value is at most 10% of your capital in surplus. They had only $138 million in surplus, and the bond is supposed to be for $175 million. So not only is it less than 10%, not less than 10% of their capital in surplus, it's 127% of their capital in surplus. That's just a no. That's just straight up, you can't afford it, even if every dollar you had available went into the bond, which is, again, 10 times more debt load than you're supposed to be allowed. Anyway, in subsequent court filings, the AG's office immediately questioned whether Knight Specialty was even good for the money. The law enforcement agency said it takes exception to the sufficiency of the surety. That's the eye-glazing language of saying they don't have that money, noting that Knight Specialty is trying to operate without a certificate of qualification, which even if they had $1 bazillion, and that's a real number, they wouldn't be able to operate in New York because they're just not licensed. In normal circumstances, defendants like Trump would tap a surety company overseen by state regulators at DFS, which verifies that an insurer is solvent, responsible, and otherwise qualified to make policies or contracts of the kind required. But Knight Specialty appears to be helping Trump with an alternative option, or rather an alternate option, operating through what's called the excess and surplus lines insurance market. But as it was pointed out on Friday, that's not the kind of bond they're talking about here. And it doesn't matter that you're, in other words, this is a little bit akin to saying, well, I am licensed to sell fire insurance in New York. Okay, fine. Is this person buying fire insurance? No, they are buying flood insurance. Well, are you licensed for flood insurance? No, but if it was a fiery flood, I would be okay. No, it just doesn't work like that. That's not a real thing. I'm sorry, you're not licensed in New York. But again, just to tie this all together again, in case your eyes were glazing over, right? They say, well, we take exception to the sufficiency of the surety, and in normal circumstances, you tap a surety company overseen by state regulators. It's straightforward. All this is, look, there's a judgment against Trump and the Trump companies for $450+ million. How are you going to guarantee that we can get this money if you eventually lose? That's what the bond is for. If it isn't right, that's no good. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to pause again. I don't know. Maybe everybody already has this understanding inherently, but just in case, take as best I can. This is not my issue area of expertise, but procedurally, and procedural matters are, I think, more in my wheelhouse. Just to sort of take you step by step through why this bond is no good. I mean, everyone accepts that the bond is no good. Everyone wants to accept that in this show, or listeners to this show. What? It's going to screw Trump? Yes. Then I understand all I need to understand. But just procedurally, why is all this? Isn't this unnecessary red tape and regulation, et cetera, this licensure in New York? I mean, they're an insurance company, or they say they're going to put up the money. What's wrong with that? Okay, right. So there's been a trial for fraud. Trump lost it. Trump lost it a long time ago, but he lost this trial. And everyone knows which one it was. And it's Judge Engoron. How much money should Trump and the Trump companies, the Trump organization, pay the state of New York as a penalty for having lost their civil fraud trial? The answer, a lump sum that was determined by, part of the trial, and show me the evidence that they defrauded somebody. Okay, how much do they think they defrauded them by? Give us your best estimate, et cetera, plus interest because they've been defrauding people this way for a long, long time. Difficult calculations, et cetera, but you get financial experts to sit down and say, this is the amount of money we think that they pried out of other financial actors by artificially inflating the value of their properties, et cetera. Answer, $450 million. And for legal purposes, you can simply start there. I think it was like $350 million, but with interest. We got to the $454 million number. And that number is growing because interest compounds every day and accrues every day. And when you're talking about $450 million, we're talking about a lot of money in interest. And I think the interest rate was pretty high, too, like 9% or something like that. I mean, wow. Anyway, so for legal purposes, you can just start there. The fact is that a court of competent jurisdiction in the state of New York has said you owe this lump sum and this amount of interest, and it's growing every day until you pay it. Now, you disagree. You think we got it wrong. You want to appeal the verdict. Fine. That is your right. In New York, everybody can take a stab at alleging that there was some mistake of law somewhere along the line in the way that the trial court handled things, and take it to a higher court in New York and make this appeal. But it is not it's not to be permitted that defendants can use their right to appeal these things to simply avoid paying. You are alleging not that you're immune from payment, but you're alleging rather that you have a case at law that stands a chance of convincing a higher court that there was some mistake in the interpretation and application of the law in Judge Engoron's courtroom. And in order to do this fairly, the court system in New York says, we'll allow you to appeal, but you can only appeal if you recognize that the current state of things is that you have just lost this case, and as a matter of law, you owe $454 million and growing, that figure, to the state of New York. You have been found liable for this fraud. So if you want to appeal, you need to guarantee the state of New York that it's going to get the money that a court of competent jurisdiction has said they are owed. If you win your appeal, you don't have to give it to them. But you can't just say, I don't want to pay, and so I'm appealing. You say, I think I have a case, and I'm appealing, but you need to show that you're going to make a good faith effort to pay off the penalties that have been handed to you before the court will entertain your appeal. If you don't have that money, you can, and many people do, get a bond for it. Or if you don't want to, liquidate assets, which are irreplaceable, I guess, in terms of direct replacement, you don't want to sell Trump Tower, because even if you do that and you take the money and you convert it into a bond and you win your case, you get the bond money back, but you don't get Trump Tower back, right? So you want to put up a bond instead. But in order to put up a bond, you have to find somebody who is willing to say to the state of New York, even though Donald Trump is not going to give you this $454 million right now for you to hold and give back to him if he wins, instead we will give you at least a paper that, when it's correctly executed, will, be an ironclad contract. We, the insurer, the bond posting company, whoever you are, who are taking on responsibility for this, I'll give you a bond that says, I'll make sure that you get paid your $454 million on behalf of Trump. The state doesn't care that much whether it gets the money from the bond company or directly from Donald Trump. They don't care because of the following reasons. One, they get their money regardless because the bond company will pay them. And two, it becomes the bond company's problem to get the $454+ million from Trump to pay them back. The state at that point is out of it. Look, I got the $450 million, and Trump is now liable to suit from the bond company for the $450 million, and I don't really care. I mean, I wish that it had come directly out of his hide, but we don't have to spend any more time or money getting that. We can now go spend the $454 million, and the bond company has to go through the headache of trying to get the $454 million from Trump that he owes them. How does he owe them that? Because he enters into a contract with them to post the bond, right? I'll put up whatever it is you demand and, do the economics. They're going to put out a paper that says we guarantee that we'll pay the state of New York $450 million. That paper with Trump is going to say, you hereby guarantee that you will pay us $450 million, probably plus some additional fee because of our taking on the trouble and the headache of having to perhaps pursue you for the money later on. Or, at the very least, even if we think it's going to be easy to get the money out of you, the headache of putting together $450 million and showing that our financial statements have got that much money and paying our lawyer to prepare the bond, et cetera, et cetera. It's worth something to us. We're going to make money off of this. We're not just doing it for fun or because we love Donald Trump, although maybe that's what Hanke is doing. That's one issue. But anyway, normally a bond company will do that. And the New York State Department of, Financial Services or whatever it is, basically says, okay, well, sometimes the thing about these bonds is they usually represent a pretty large amount of money. If they didn't, you would be able to expect that the defendants themselves would be able to put up the cash. So we need to be sure about this. Remember, this is the mechanism by which the state is guaranteed to collect the money it just won. Or any defendant. It doesn't have to be, or rather plaintiff. It doesn't have to be a suit brought by the state. That can be done this way. If one private company sues another private company, I guess, for, I don't know what the private, market is like there. But presumably, if the defendant there wanted to appeal, the plaintiff would insist that there be some sort of bond put up, and they may even have the power of the statutory law behind them to require that of any defendant seeking an appeal. But in this case, we know it's the case that the state itself can certainly leverage this power. I don't really know the civil practice in New York, but we've learned enough reading that the state does have this power, and probably all plaintiffs have this power once they've won judgment, because that's the point of going to court, right? And suing for $100 million, whatever it is I'm going to leverage the power of the state on my behalf. If I prove my case, the state is willing to say, we as arbiters of justice guarantee that you will have legal recourse. You've proven your case in front of a jury. A verdict has been entered. We have an interest in seeing that it gets paid. You can leverage the justice system to guarantee it. Anyway, here the state does so directly. The bond is posted ordinarily by someone whom the state, as the beneficiary of this bond, is going to want to make sure that the bond issuer can make good on the bond. Not just anybody can walk in and say, you need a bond that says I'll pay $175 million? Sure, here's one, right? And the state says so on the paper, that's enough for us. No, the state has the right, statutorily, to say, show us that you can pay this money. In fact, here's the criterion by which we insist you show us. You should be able to produce a legally binding, on penalty of perjury, to produce a financial statement that says, as the regulations and laws here in New York State for licensure say, that you are issuing a bond that represents no more than 10% of your capital. And I forget what the terminology they were using in this, but basically show me that you've got so much money that this represents no more than 10% of your capital in surplus. So in other words, if you're going to write a $175 million bond, you need what? 17, how much? 175 million, 10% of which, or that is 10% of $1.75 billion, right? If you have $1.75 billion in capital and surplus, and I guess presumably are writing no other bonds, but no single bond can be 10% or more. So, okay, fine. $175 million, or rather $1.75 billion in capital and surplus will be acceptable to us if you're already otherwise licensed, by the way. And by that, we want to know, where do you do business? Where can we find you if something gets screwed up? Who's the person that we would serve a subpoena to if for whatever reason you take off and don't pay the money? Have you paid your taxes? All that kind of stuff. Show us that you're a real company. And then show us that you've got $1.75 billion. And Knight, one, isn't licensed, and so nobody knows how they do business and who works there and who are their banks and what are they going to put up by way of proving that they can pay all of this. And also show us your financial statement. Oh, wait, you don't have anything near that. You don't even have enough money, even if all of your capital and surplus went to paying this bond. We're not going to accept that. And that's no good. That's why it's no good. That's the procedure. I think everybody kind of inherently understands that, but just to step through here, all of this. This is why you need to show all this stuff. It's not just red tape. It's not just set up to get in the way of businessmen doing business. The state needs to know that it's going to get its money. Any plaintiff would need to know that they were getting their money. Otherwise, there's no point in having a judicial system in which there are civil trials and awards are made, right? Because you're just never going to get it. Otherwise, people would say, well, I appeal. You appeal? What does that mean? That means I'm not going to pay you. That would not be a workable judicial system, would it? So, anyway, like we said, in normal circumstances, you have to prove all of this stuff and show that you are licensed to do business in New York, because those are the people against whom New York will have recourse, right? And two, that you have enough money, because that's the whole point of you being involved in this anyway. Nobody sued you, Knight Insurance Company. Why are we interested in how much money you have? Because you, for whatever stupid reason, usually a payment, a fee of some kind from the defendant who loses, you are saying, I'll step in to the shoes of the defendant. I will pay New York if this guy takes off or just loses his appeal. In the industry, this secondary exchange, remember, this is where Knight was saying, we don't need to be licensed to operate in New York to offer bonds, because we could sell certain kinds of insurance in New York, even though we're not licensed there, under the excess and surplus lines insurance market. Well, in the industry, this secondary exchange, excess and surplus lines insurance, is typically reserved for high-risk business ventures, that's certainly Trump, or those that have a severe loss history, that's certainly Trump, that make them untouchable in the primary market. That's Trump, in a way, forcing them to find a willing insurer that isn't licensed in their home state. But that's not what super successful, wealthy businessmen with billions of cash assets are supposed to need. And it doesn't apply to bonds for appeals in court. It's just, that's not the sort of thing. I mean, why would the court say yes to a bond that is issued under a technical exception to insurance licensing reserved for people who are super high risk and are so unable to raise capital elsewhere that they can only resort to this? That would not be sufficient. That would not be the sort of thing that the state would have confidence in. They would simply just say, if you want to appeal, you're going to have to put up the cash yourself. Indeed, the insurance company's president, Amit Shah, and lawyer, right, made that very point when defending his firm's ability to strike this deal, telling CBS News that Knight is not a New York domestic insurer, and New York surplus lines insurance laws do not regulate the solvency of non-New York excess lines insurers. That's why Knight Specialties' recent finances, which showed that its capital and surplus were even smaller in recent years, were registered with the Surplus Lines Stamping Office of Texas, a government-created nonprofit that tracks these types of figures. Okay. New York has a nonprofit like that, too. It's called the Excess Line Association of New York, ELANY, Elani. States that its role is to facilitate compliance by verifying that these secondary market insurers meet eligibility standards in order to underwrite risks presented by excess line brokers. The group's communications manager, John Rosenblatt, explains that Elani if that's what they call it, conducts a thorough financial examination of every foreign insurer listed. It's a voluntary process, but one that's meant to actually prove that a company is trustworthy and stable. Oh well. The Alani list is composed of insurers that request to be listed and are approved by Alani following a thorough analysis of the insurer's financial security, Rosenblatt told the Daily Beast. But that raises another issue. Knight Specialty Insurance Company is not even on the Alani voluntary list, Rosenblatt said, so they've submitted nothing to anybody. While any company filing these types of transactions to the New York quasi-governmental private sector regulator must use a licensed broker within 45 days, Alani says that it has no knowledge of the specific transaction at this time. Furthering the point of just how anomalous this Trump deal is, Alani recorded $76 million and $74 million in surety and fidelity transactions in 2002 and 2003, respectively. That means Trump's bond alone would represent double what all of Alani does. All Alani typically monitors over hundreds of transactions in a given year, and this would more than double what they usually do. And that includes premiums that aren't only tied to court judgments like this one. In his interview with CBS last week, Knight Specialty's president asserted that the company has more than $1 billion in equity, but that doesn't matter. It needs 1.75. The bond it posted on Thursday also included a financial snapshot of a second corporate entity, the similarly named Knight Insurance Company Limited, which lists $1 billion in surplus to policyholders. The document seems to suggest that the smaller company is somehow strengthened by the existence of the larger one, but only the smaller company is actually listed on the bond agreement. In reality, though, a strict reading of bond number 350588 shows that even the smaller company isn't technically on the hook for paying out that $175 million if higher courts ultimately cement his loss to the AG. Buried in the typical legalese of the contract is the phrase, Knight Specialty Insurance Company does hereby undertake that if the judgment is dismissed, Donald J. Trump shall pay the sum directed. In other words, if Trump loses the case, Trump will pay. But that's no different than Trump's obligation before the bond was issued. That's the crazy part. Getting into the weeds, the company undertakes that Trump will pay, said one bond industry source who declined to be publicly identified for this story. So, essentially they're saying, give me the bond. And they give him a bond, and the bond says, we won't pay. That's not a bond. Can't accept that. Well, Alani, we have this much in assets. Well, what about this company? What about the parent company? Doesn't matter. This paper doesn't say that you're going to give us any of that money. So you could prove to us that you had $1 trillion. If the paper says you're not going to give us any of it, why do we want the paper? That's all there is to it. It's literally that dumb. Getting into the weeds, the company undertakes that Trump will pay, said one bond industry source who declined to be publicly identified, and we just read that. This is Trump's second big-figure bond in recent weeks. Of course, there was the E. Jean Carroll one where they had to put up $83 million in that bond. I think even more, $93 million. He managed to score a deal with a subsidiary of insurance megagiant Chubb that would force Chubb, to pay $92 million if Trump can't cough up the money. But they actually wrote and said that they would do that. That's why they accepted that bond. Unlike the bank fraud bond, the Carroll bond agreement specifically says that such payments shall be made by the surety to the obligee, that's Chubb, if Trump fails to pay. Hanley said a proper contract would name Trump and the insurance company jointly and severally, which would mean that they're both on the hook for the total. This wouldn't be the first time that Trump has been caught trying to slip questionable clauses into a bond contract. In the Carroll case, Trump almost got away with an underhanded 60-day delay to paying her, that is, until her lawyers brought it to the judge's attention. So this is something he does all the time. And if that's not enough, there's a third gem buried in this contract that has industry experts and lawyers scratching their heads. The standard practice would be to promise that the loser would pay the judgment plus interests and cost. However, Trump's bank fraud bond doesn't list that either. Instead, it says the liability of this bond shall not exceed the sum of $175 million. And they're not even paying it. Trump would be, allegedly. Clifford Robert, the lawyer who filed the bond with the court and also represents Trump's sons, Don Jr. and Eric in this case, did not respond to questions. Neither did Knight Specialty Insurance Company. So I guess it wasn't Todd, after all. I think that's a different case. But anyway, he's got so many going on. Hanley, the bond expert, said the lawyers who drew up this latest Trump bond could try to assert that Knight Specialty doesn't owe anybody anything without much success, but it bears all the hallmarks of Trump's overarching legal strategy, pushing off the inevitable as long as possible. That could be set up for that argument, but this would fall under a common law statute. My best guess is that all of this is set up to delay again, he said, and that's how we read it the other day. Not that they really thought that they had fulfilled the obligations, not even that they thought that they could talk a court into accepting this arrangement because what else are you going to do? But rather that it would leave the court saying this is unacceptable and no, we're not going to take it, at which point Trump says, well, okay, that was just a mistake. I overlooked this. It should have said that, but it didn't. We left it out. Give us 10 days to correct it. Okay, because obviously, you can't have a bond that says this is not a bond. Take out the part that says this is not a bond and put in some language that says it is a bond. All right, give us 10 days to do it. And then if you come back afterwards and say, well, here you go, 10 days on the dot. This says this is not a bond, not bond. Wait a minute. How many knots is that? There's like a quadruple negative in here. What? Oh, gosh. I can't believe it. This is so embarrassing. Another drafting error. Give us 10 more days. This could go on forever until the court says, no more days. This is something you can employ forever. It's amazing that this continues to happen. Yes, I'll use up even more time on the bond thing, I guess, in that... let's see. Well, I wanted to at least point out that ProPublica had also done a piece on this. And let's see. Trump's lawyers told the court that no one would give him a bond. Then he got a lifeline, but they didn't tell the judges. Is not a super lengthy piece, but we won't have time to do it here today. But that's the one I referred to earlier. Robert Fatorecki, do I have that right? Justin Elliott and Alex Majerski. Some of those names we've called before. For ProPublica on this one. And yeah, pointing out that as an appeals court reduced Trump's bond by more than 60% after his attorneys claimed that it was a practical impossibility to pay the full amount, their failure to disclose a proposal from a billionaire financier, Hanke, may have violated ethics rules. Although it'd be interesting to see whether they try and claim, no, it wasn't a violation of ethics rules. We didn't disclose that there had been an offer, but that offer would never have worked because they totally don't have the money to cover a $454 million bond. So technically, it's not an ethical lapse on our part to not disclose to you that somebody wanted to make a fraudulent bond on our behalf. Okay, but that would hold a lot more water if, after the bond was reduced to $175 million, you didn't return to that person for a fraudulent $175 million bond. Don't you think? What? No. You could cling to that, but for most people, it's not going to make a great deal of sense, let's say. All right, well, we are very near the third break, and of course, well, you know, the many, many other different things that we didn't get to, but we can discuss with Joan, and I'm sure it would be, it'll make for a good roundup and rounding out our day here. By the way, let's see. It should also come to our attention here. This is a Guardian piece that we'll have to spend more time on at some point in the future, but maybe we'll just put this on the record here before we head out for our third break. An exclusive from The Guardian: Trump media was saved in 2022 by, you'll never guess who, a Russian American who also happens to be under criminal investigation. So yes, the stock has gone public. Yes, Trump thinks that it might eventually provide a gigantic financial windfall. Yes, the stock price has been plummeting ever since, and that's a fantastic thing. And he's lost about half of the value of the windfall he thought he was going to get, and that's a good thing all by itself. Also, but in addition, they should never have been able to survive to get to the IPO after all. And, well, that's, I think, obvious from their filings, that they have almost no revenue to speak of. Why they should have a market cap over 100 times revenue, no one knows. But they shouldn't even have had that revenue, but for having been bailed out in 2022 by a Russian American already under criminal investigation. How do you like that? Who would have guessed?
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter joins us. I was just asking her about how the eclipse went back there. Did the sun return? And then I realized I was asking someone in Seattle if the sun returned. And how would they know? Portland, I'm sorry.
Close
enough. Close enough.
We got a sliver of it, supposedly, behind the clouds.
Okay. Yeah, so, I understand it was about 30% in that
more
area.
like 20.
20?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it varies, and it varies very quickly. So I suppose even within Oregon, you can have variances. I guess Justice was saying, I guess where he is was maybe 30, or maybe he miscalculated too. Who knows? But all right, well, I don't know. Was it noticeable? I guess nothing happens if 20%, 30% gets covered.
We had complete cloud cover, so
there's also that. Yeah. All right. Well,
I missed my chance in 2017 when it was right over Idaho wilderness. Yeah, I was going to go camping with friends and got sick. So I missed the totality, and it would have been in a wilderness area which has dark sky. That would have just been
crazy.
Phenomenal. There's no light pollution where we would have been, where it was in totality, and I just kick myself for having missed that. Well,
it's only like 200 and something years to the next one or whatever. So just hang in there. I mean, don't get sick because 200 years is hard to pull off if you're sick the whole time. But okay, well, the sun mostly has returned. Congress also mostly has, well, not yet, but they're supposed to return this week. And I guess this is the day they fly in. And they have some dumb things to take care of.
They have some dumb things. They have some really important things.
Yes. Oh, which they'll handle dumbly.
Precedence.
Dumb things, inherently dumb things first. And then I guess important things handled dumbly come next. This is the order of operations for Congress.
Exactly.
Okay. So
let's make sure we specify that it is the Republican Congress.
Yes. All right. That's true too. So if
and it does spill over into the Democratic Senate because they have to deal with the stupid.
Right. I guess if they were being handed reasonable bills by a fully functional House, whoever was heading it, even though, really only one party even going to be capable of coming close to that, and it's not the one that allegedly has the majority in the House. So what's dumb thing number one on the list? What's the first thing they do?
The dumb thing number one on the list is the Senate having to deal with the Alejandro Mayorkas impeachment.
Okay. So that begins tomorrow. They bring the papers over. There's a whole, thing. They march over there. If you turn on television to see it, you'll see Marjorie Taylor Greene, idiot extraordinaire, among them. I guess she's a manager, believe it or not.
Yes, she's a manager along with Andy Biggs.
Oh, wow. That's some group. So they march it over, and they get a chance to speak to the Senate, which is amazing.
We're going to have to watch it just to see what Marjorie Taylor Greene does.
Yeah. She's
in
going
the
to wear
Senate chamber, because
who knows? She may come over there in the big QAnon shaman's hat, maybe. By the way, I think she should actually do that. Paint her face red, white, and blue, wear the big hat, get up there and howl.
Decked out in all of her Trump regalia.
Yeah. And that's actually an issue. Like, I wonder if she's given that any thought. Like, she could show up in Trump gear, and the Senate would have to decide, is this like within bounds for decorum on the Senate floor? But then the House managers by right are supposed to have this access. What do you do if you just come so outrageously dressed, or with props or things that would otherwise get you in trouble with Senate decorum? Which wins out? I don't know. Now that I've said it, she's probably thinking.
We have to watch now.
Yeah,
we have to watch
to see, right? Does she come with a big MAGA hat or a giant novelty foam finger of some kind with short little fingers? The hand is big, but the fingers are small. I don't know. We'll see. They bring that and they present it, and then the next day, by usual practice, the Senate has to swear itself in as jurors in the case, no matter what it is they decide to do with the case.
Yep.
But all the advance word so far is they look for some way to dismiss it or get rid of it or shunt it aside very quickly. Right?
Yes, that's what it's going to look like. And I think that you're seeing lip service from Republican leadership about saying, we have to actually have a trial. We have to do this for real, and Democrats aren't going to let us. The Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, whoever else contingent is going to try to raise a lot of hell about it on the floor, demanding that they have hearings and that they actually do a trial. But I don't think that there's really any appetite among other Republicans. And even a few, Mitt Romney included, have said, we should probably just dismiss this because it's ridiculous. So whether they are able to immediately dismiss it is going to depend a little bit on attendance. Mm-hmm. Majority Leader Schumer sent out a letter on Friday saying, everybody, you got to be there next Thursday. You have to be there so that he has the votes to dismiss it, hopefully.
Yes.
Because he does not have opposition from Kristen Sinema or from Joe Manchin to do that. So Democrats and independents are united in thinking this is bullshit. They just got to get rid of it.
Okay. Well, it's nice that there's some unity there. By the way,
and they can do it with a majority vote, simple majority vote.
Yes, and that's good. And hopefully they can put that together. I think they should, just as an emergency measure, maybe they want to close all restaurants in Delaware, perhaps that evening, just to make sure that Chris Coons is available. Or buy him some takeout or something. We brought you some Olive Garden. Come on, come on back.
I think Chris will be there for this.
He'll be there for this. Okay, good. All right. Well, there's advance notice, and it's not a special holiday that we're aware of.
Or an even, fake holiday, a Hallmark holiday.
Right. He's not Muslim, so it's unlikely that he'd need to go for Eid. Yeah. Okay. I think we're clear.
Yeah.
Good.
I think we're clear.
Okay, excellent.
But, here's the Senate having to take the better part of 2 days dealing with it, which is just stupid.
Yeah.
It's stupid.
If they had other important things to do, then you would think so. But what else is there? Really?
What else is there?
I don't know. Many
there
things.
is. Well, what else?
Yeah.
Of course, the big thing is aid to Ukraine and Israel, and that has gotten infinitely more complicated with the deaths of the World Central Kitchen volunteers.
Yes, right.
There in Gaza. And I'm not really sure how you get around it. There, as long as Ukraine and Israel stay together in that package, you've got problems with both the crazy Republicans and with progressives in the House. Because at this point,
growing numbers,
the aid to Israel is a blank check. And I don't think at this point that even Biden is comfortable with a blank check to Israel.
Yes.
So,
that
absolutely has to be resolved now, along with how in the hell they're going to get Ukraine funded.
Yeah. That creates a huge complication, and as it occurs to me that as you're saying it, the way you're putting it, like that's an opportunity for Republicans to make more problems in addition to their weird objections to Ukraine getting funded. If they begin to see that more Democrats and maybe even President Biden are uncomfortable with the old formulation from months ago, that it's essentially be a blank check to Israel, and things have changed since then. They suggest if they can sense that discomfort, then they oppose making any changes to it so that it's super uncomfortable for Democrats, and they either don't vote for it and they say, "Why do you hate Israel?" to people who say, "Well, I just oppose this formulation of aid to Israel. I'm voting yes, or I would be willing to vote to aid to Israel, but under certain conditions." Well, why want conditions? I don't know. You want them on Ukraine. Shut up. Look away. I don't know. So this could become extraordinarily complicated. They may end up having to, I don't know if they have time to separate them again or the will to separate them.
Well, that's what Johnson wants to try to do.
He originally did, didn't he? Yeah.
And I don't know. The problem then, of course, is that if they pass this one by some miracle discharge petition, which I don't think at this point is going to happen.
Right. Well, late.
How do they get the Senate bill on the floor? Probably it doesn't look right now like there's a way to do it unless Johnson really, really means he's going to do Ukraine aid, and this is the only option available to him. You could look at Johnson and think, since we are now in mid-April, let's call it mid-April, and he's been talking about, we'll do it someday. Since September, he doesn't really mean that.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to think that Johnson doesn't really mean it.
Maybe not. Yeah.
If they do their own bill, then it has to make it through all the permutations on the House, which are going to be miserable. I mean, trying to find something that everybody can agree on to the House probably isn't going to happen this week.
Yeah.
It would then have to go back to the Senate again and be passed there. And, of course, the week after next is another week of recess.
They've got down.
We are looking optimistically at May for this funding to be done. Depending on what happens with Johnson and Ukraine and how much pressure they can put to bear on him.
Yeah. Wow. Well, doesn't make us look like particularly good allies.
It is extraordinarily complicated. And then on top of that, they've got to, by the 19th, reauthorize FISA.
Yes.
Or not.
Right. I can't believe we're back to that.
There's been ongoing fights among Republicans. In this case, Jordan is not necessarily being a bad guy. He's been working with Jerry Nadler to make sure that there are protections, of course, coming from the wrong side in doing it, but still it's protections for American citizens who get caught up in FISA authorizations.
Wow.
Making sure that there are warrants for any information collected from them. So, Jim Jordan's thinking about it from a MAGA context, from a January 6th Patriot context, but still, doing the right thing, like Rand Paul sometimes has.
Yeah, occasionally does happen.
And on the other side, you've got the Intelligence Committee, which has said, yeah, we don't want that. That's dangerous. That's bad. So they've spent all of these months trying to figure out and trying to put the FISA bill on the floor and realizing they don't have the votes and having to pull it, not being able to get through Rules Committee, all the usual stuff that we have seen from this Congress. That has to be done by April 19th.
Phew. Yeah, unlikely. Meanwhile, great. Who's doing PR for Taiwan? Keeping their head down and all this.
Right, I know Taiwan's just like.
Are we going to get ours? Yeah. Although I guess that's in jeopardy. But meanwhile, no one objects to aid to Taiwan.
Nope.
Well, I guess if you're up against, top line news players and controversy like Israel and Ukraine, you're going to tend to keep a lower profile, I guess. No matter, even if you wanted a higher profile, it wouldn't work. But it was interesting. I noted earlier, was reading a little bit about the complicated situation, and just interesting that even under, ostensibly Republican and MAGA Republican control of the House, the tension remains between the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee on FISA. And it's just sort of the nature of their charges, I guess, and who they tend to hear from in hearings, and what they view their job as being. But yeah, even from the wrong side and upside down and backwards, Republicans on the Judiciary Committee can occasionally end up with strong objections to expanding surveillance powers. Even sometimes they only come to it because they're the ones finally being arrested.
Right.
But, they do get there from time to time. Weird and interesting, and I can't believe FISA again back. And
I know.
It just...
I know.
The cycle never ends, I guess. If it's not a government shutdown, it's a FISA renewal. Somehow. Wow.
And, of course, in this particular Congress, the threat of a motion to vacate.
Yeah.
Because
I haven't learned anything more about the likelihood of success there, but...
Well, Johnson and Greene supposedly had a chat on Friday.
Oh.
And I have forgotten to look to see if anybody blabbed about what happened out of it. The last I saw was Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, well, I'm not backing down from this threat.
Okay.
You put Ukraine on the floor.
She's never going to say that.
She's got... I think there's a problem with a handful of Republicans who are, I guess, trolling Johnson with it.
Okay.
Massey is one, Rosendale's one, saying, well, we're not really with Marjorie at this point, but we sure could be. So, in order for him to survive what she will probably do as a motion to vacate, he might be thinking he has to make sure he keeps Democrats happy. To keep Democrats happy, he has to put Ukraine aid on the floor.
Yeah. And then of course, it's an issue of, well, do I keep the same number of Democrats happy if it's attached to Israel aid? And they're unhappy about that.
Is that going to be enough? Chances are pretty good Republicans wouldn't vote to vacate him. But as of April 19th, he has just one vote to spare. Because that's when Mike Gallagher leaves.
Right. And, I didn't even really connect the two in my mind. But I was like, well, she just mentioned April 19th. Why is that interesting again? Oh, yeah, right. Well, that was the FISA deadline, but it also was like end of the week or something.
It's a Friday.
Okay, but then so he aimed at the 19th for his own in-state reasons, not having anything to do with FISA or Friday, believe it or not. But
interestingly enough,
yeah,
late enough that there can't be a special election before November.
Yeah,
for the seat.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he did that purposefully, saying, "You're just going to have to deal with this vacancy."
That's kind of the speculation, although he never did say.
No.
I hate FISA. But, that's why I did it.
You know, he could have done it before the last 2-week recess. He doesn't have to do it before the next recess.
Yeah, right. That's true. I mean, you would have. Well, he gets the benefit of both. So I guess I'll take my paycheck for 2 weeks of recess that if I were looking for a re-election, I would be working hard, but instead it's just vacation for me. And then I'll take another one in a week, and then I'll resign. But yeah, lots of speculation that this was supposed to be some sort of shiv in the MAGA Republican House leadership. Maybe, but also maybe just, I don't know. It's not FISA, probably, but because no one really.
At any rate, it's fun.
Yeah, sure. This is his way of, I'm doing this for Taiwan, which no one is paying attention to. I don't know. But yeah, it's fun and exciting and fraught with peril for Johnson, which good, fine, except it's also a moment in the sun for the weirdest Republican wackadoodles, although it's a great opportunity for them to think they were going to get a moment in the sun and ultimately to fail and have everybody point and laugh at them, and that's okay too. Not sure. But a big week for...
People are going to point and laugh at them regardless.
Well, good. They should.
Yes.
And it could be made worse.
No, it is very fun. It is very fun. Knowing that anything Johnson tries to get done, he's going to have to do under suspension of the rules. Yeah. And that's just going to make all of the whack jobs even angrier at him. Johnson is essentially at this point a lame duck.
Yeah. Well,
because nobody respects him at this point. Most Republicans are conceding that they're going to lose the House in November. And here's this guy who has not led them out of it. They don't want him back as leader. So he's in this bizarre position now of being in charge of everything but having absolutely no power.
Yeah. If they were to somehow retain the House, I'm not even sure what they do for speaker election come around. I don't January.
Think they keep him, and I'm not entirely sure at this point that he would want to keep it. But he keeps talking to members, according to the gossip in Politico and Punchbowl, which, they're very gossipy, yes, but they're generally also pretty correct. He's been going around telling everybody how exhausted he is and how much he hates all of this travel and how much how tiring and awful this is for him. So,
well, it is hard work. And I guess if he's trying to do it, well, that's just a mistake on his part.
Yes.
This was a bad idea.
Including going to California last week to help fundraise for all of those vulnerable Republicans in California, the Biden 16, who had the fundraiser they had was hosted by two of the architects of California Right to Life.
Oh,
so that's fun.
Yeah, well, they're going to have a hard time.
Karen Spencer, who were bigwigs in the Right to Life movement there in California, and opened their home or business, I'm not sure which it was.
Maybe both.
To have this big dollar fundraiser for all of these House Republicans who are torn between saying IVF is the greatest thing ever for families and fertilized eggs are people.
It's great for families, and then I don't know what the problem is. What happens later? It's they're tied up in knots over IVF, and I guess just hoping people just ignore the conflict in the same way that I guess if you're going to buy, for instance, this new idea that Trump's really actually kind of pro-choice, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like he was the biggest friend to the LGBTQ community, or as he put it, it took him like 15 minutes to work out the letters there, but LGBTQ.
Well, Trump did get some help yesterday from a lot of the traditional media who said Trump refuses national ban on abortion. No, he didn't. No, not so much.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I will not sign it.
Right.
He said, okay, so we could have the national ban, but there have to be exceptions. There has to be exceptions. Just like Ronald Reagan said.
Yes. Well.
Yeah, we don't believe that.
No, it would be inadvisable to believe anything that he says. It's really always an open question. Does he even understand what he's said? He's been handed a card to read.
That's probably a no.
Yeah.
For one thing, saying it's all up to the states. It's all up to the states. There has to be exceptions. Mm-hmm. A lot of these states do not have exceptions.
Yeah. Well,
so
that's
how do you deal with that one, Don?
Yeah, you'd have to have no memory whatsoever to. I mean, that happens, but you'd have to have no memory whatsoever to believe that was anything other than, Republicans have said all this time, up until Dobbs, that they oppose abortion, but it was always leave it to the states. If they didn't want to say, yes, I'm for a national abortion ban, if they were afraid to say that, they would say, leave it to the states, knowing that, several states are engineering essential bans that I guess are designed to look like something other than a ban. Well, we'll allow it if, but impossible situation. And that state after state that these Republicans were representing were doing this, and their aim was to make it impossible for anybody in their state to get an abortion, and then impossible for anybody to leave their state and get an abortion elsewhere as well. So, yeah, but this is not something new. I don't know. I mean, Trump may think it's some sort of innovation, but leave it to the states was always the fake excuse for, I'd be for, And I say leave it to the states, but if you're going to sign this, then leave it to the federal government. I changed my mind.
Certainly the families living in the leave it to the states know what the situation is. So he did not help himself at all. He didn't help House Republicans, Senate Republicans who were looking for a way out of this mess by any means, because he just said he embraced the status quo. The status quo is not working for them.
That's true. And he has no comprehension of that. And then, of course, as you were saying it, I was like, well, why are we even talking about whether or not Donald Trump helped anybody? That's crazy. Of course, he's not going to help anybody.
There's that, too.
What are we talking about? What? Donald Trump didn't help somebody? Well, yeah, but they're on his side. I know. It doesn't matter. But, yeah, and of course, it's funny, too, that this is, now that I think about it, this is another place where he's just sort of, his brain is stuck in the 80s, 90s mode, as always. That was the genesis of, we'll leave it to the states idea. Yeah, maybe that won't work out so badly, or maybe they won't blame us for it. It's not my state that did that. No, but you're trying to make it be your state. Maybe. But, it's just old line thinking. That's the last ideas to ever penetrate his brain happened sometime in the early 90s, I guess, and that's it. He just
think so.
Resorts to that. So. All right. Well, it'll be an exciting-ish week. There'll be some C-SPAN spectacle starting tomorrow. And
I hope so.
We will all have to watch.
So.
Yeah. And Marjorie is, I don't know, she's got a history of making like weird, I hesitate to say fashion, but fashion statements, clothing that she wears that's supposed to signal everything from Snow Queen to Ultra MAGA at a rally thing to who knows what. So we'll see how she dresses for the occasion.
I don't know if anybody would be able to go to her and say, this time around, maybe you ought to behave yourself.
You could try it.
I don't know if that would even work.
Yeah, I don't
know.
know.
For one thing, who's going to want to ally with Marjorie Taylor Greene in the Senate if she's doing antics? Who's going to want to anyway?
Yeah.
But, I think making her an impeachment manager was...
Yeah, I mean, I figure they had to...
a bit of a mistake.
Yeah, they probably had to do that because people thought... I don't know, she was going to raise a stink otherwise, but now we get to see what she's going to wear. I think maybe bandoliers would work for her. Grenade belts of some kind, and see if they let her through the metal detector. All right, well, we'll have lots to watch, and we'll check in with you and see whether the Marjorie Taylor Greene was arrested on her way to the Senate tomorrow.
Or
next
whether
week.
Everything's just imploded by next Tuesday.
All right.
That's possible, too.
It's always, we live in exciting times, and that's terrible tragedy. We'll check in with you next week and see how things went. Thanks for stopping by and bringing us up to speed. Keep your C-SPAN on.
Welcome.
And keep an eye on the front page at Daily Kos, where Joan will be writing about all this stuff at great pains, no doubt. But still a pretty good job, I would say, right? And you're doing a good job with it at that. So
I'm doing my best.
Okay. All right. We'll keep an eye on it. Thanks. Stay well, and we'll check in next week. And now time for us to hand things over to Justice. Thanks again, Joan. Justice coming up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And he's even given me a quick preview, as usual, of what's going on. But it's just one of 15,000 chats now open on Skype, including about 15 AI bots that Skype has added to their lineup.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I would say, though, tops on the list of things that I wanted to get to and didn't, but he'll do batting cleanup for us, happened in court. And, of course, right top of the list here, a 66-page scathing filing from Jack Smith urging the Supreme Court to reject Trump's claims of complete and in total immunity. We're getting back around to that. Stay tuned.